Oh my gosh, so you want to write a fantasy novel? I'm literally obsessed. I love fantasy and I've been writing also a couple of fantasy novels. So today I'm very excited to be giving you guys some tips on how to write fantasy. I also want to say thank you so much for Skillshare for sponsoring today's video, but more about them soon. But I don't want to make this intro too long, so let's go ahead and get on to the tips on how to write your fantasy novel. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Alright besties, so you firstly need a concept. Fantasy novels always need a unique, interesting concept that makes your fantasy novel fantastical, which kind of just means otherworldly. It's really good to think of genres and subgenres that you really are drawn to. And literally the best way to come up with an interesting concept is to figure out what you like. I like to ask myself, what do I like about fantasy novels? I really like retellings, I really like mythical things, mythical beasts, and also journey stories. Like, I'm just obsessed with those few things. So when I'm coming up with a new fantasy novel, I make sure that I include all those things into my story. This is great because you as a person, you're gonna be very, very individual. And what you like will literally transform your story into something you really adore. Because as a lover of fantasy, you must like very particular things from different fantasy worlds, fantasy stories, whether that be tropes or characters or places or things. So just include all of that within your story. For example, you might really love curses and maybe want to make a world where there's maybe these people called curse breakers who specialize in breaking curses. Maybe you really like dark academia, kind of like the vibe that's going on in today's video. And maybe you can add that to, maybe there's a academy that specializes in curse breaking. So then maybe the witches or the people who make the curses are really the bad guys. And it's almost like the curse breakers are like the police. Do you see how those like two interests were able to combine into a very specific, but also very interesting and intriguing novel that you love? Just keep adding to your concept. Don't make it too complicated, but make it with core things that you just really, really love. Tip number 2 is the big four. The big four include lore, which is kind of the history of your story, geography, which is basically the setting, people, which is literally just your culture, your society, government, and lastly, your magic system, which can include magic or technology. And it's really important that these all should inform the other. Maybe the history informs how the geography works within the story. For example, like in the Grishaverse, where Ravka is torn into two by the Great Divide, which is the darkness. And the history, which I don't want to spoil, really does inform the state of the setting as it is. My biggest tip here is to let your inspiration also just charge these 4 different parts of your story. When you're thinking about lore and making it very specific to your story, or stuff like magical objects or something like that, I'll give you an example in my story where I take lots of inspiration from the Bible and sort of different mythical things and mythical creatures within the Bible. And I also really adore my love for King Arthur and Arthurian mythology. So I was like, how can I combine the two? And I was thinking about Excalibur, which is such a big part of the Arthur story. And I was like, maybe that can just be like the flaming sword in the Bible that's like outside the, Garden of Eden. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a cool way to kind of create that lore by connecting those two interests together. Again, inspiration is so important in informing your story. But if you need other sort of ideas to kind of make up that big four, whether it be the lore, geography, society, or magic system, here are some quick ideas. Maybe use weather as like a plot device. Maybe it's its own system, maybe it's a place, maybe the world is kind of divided, kind of like in Tinkerbell, into those factions. Or maybe use flora and fauna as like a magic system, or holidays and rituals, which are part of society, as something that really is focused on within the plot and the history of your world. Maybe there's people called dreamsmiths who steal dreams, or maybe like the curse breakers that we talked about before. Think about how the jobs are actually needed in the magic system and how that's a part of the society of your story. If you guys need more help fine-tuning your world building skills, I'm very excited to be introducing Skillshare to you guys. Skillshare is an amazing online learning community that provides educational videos to help you build different skills. There's so many creative classes for hobbyists, creative professionals, and everyone in between. You can learn a skill from scratch, build a creative habit, or level up in your career or hobby. For example, if you want to hone your skill of world building or maybe specifically magic system building, there's so many classes on Skillshare to help you guys with that. World-class professionals teach on Skillshare, so you can learn directly from people that you admire. I'm such a firm believer in self-investment and investing in your own skills because I think that's an investment that you will always be earning from. And the best thing about Skillshare is that you can learn at your own pace and learn wherever you want. I actually took a haiku class through Skillshare and it was so fun. I had no idea when I got into it how to write a haiku, but then as I learned, it just was such an amazing experience and such a cool skill to have because I usually write poetry quite freely, but learning about the structure of haikus and learning at my own pace was just something so refreshing from like what I'm taught like during university and high school, where Skillshare allows you to learn those skills, you know, at your own pace and ensure that you get everything out of that experience. And the best thing is the first 500 besties to use my link in the description or scan this QR code on the screen. You can just scan it right here, especially if you're watching at home on your TV. You'll receive 1 month free on me, besties. 1 month free of a trial on Skillshare. So whether you want to learn how to edit your story, maybe line edit or copy editing, or maybe write a haiku like I did, please go ahead and check out Skillshare in the description below. Thank you so much Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so the third tip of fantasy writing is to ask questions and answer simply. It's kind of difficult to answer simply, but I'll tell you guys what I mean. What helps me world build and write my fantasy story is to ask the questions, what if? I'm gonna use Leigh Bardugo again in this example, but Leigh Bardugo shared in one of her TED Talks of how she came up with Ravka and, you know, that sort of world. And her first question of creating this whole Grishaverse, which we know today, was a question that was, what if darkness was a place? And when she asked this question, she just simply could not go to bed. She had to get up out of her bed, sit at her desk, and start asking more questions. Questions such as what lives in the darkness? What caused the darkness in the first place? And as she answered these questions and kind of as they flowed on from another, she was able to make a very structured world building system because of course there's a question and there will be an answer. And usually future questions might inform previous answers, if that makes sense. I literally do this all the time. Even when I'm working out like plot kinks and stuff like that, I literally just ask a question and it helps me answer. Instead of saying like, maybe this happens, ask questions. Alrighty, so the next question, I think this is question number 4, is that usually when you're starting to write a fantasy novel, it's usually the world first and then your characters. And when you're creating a fantasy novel, of course, a main character, i.e. the hero, is very, very important. I think here when you're creating the character, it's really important to stop and take a step back and ask, what do you want to tell with this story? It's interesting to see how people come up with, you know, their worlds, because trust me, the world that you've created will help you answer all these questions and help you develop your main character, because subconsciously you've been working towards a specific theme, a specific issue in the way that you've built your story. And you got to make sure, like, imagine you picking your main character, you got to plop them, you know, in the right place to tell the right story. For example, my current fantasy project, Project Blackbirds, also known as Project BB, I wanted the story to be very like feminist, girl power, but also a commentary on class and rebellion. How can my character show that if she has nothing to rebel against? It wouldn't make sense to put her as, you know, one of the noble women. She needed to be someone who was in the lower class, who was a girl, and who had the opportunity to rebel. So the way that I developed her and placed her within the system allowed her story to be told in a way that addressed these issues that I wanted to explore. A good question to help, this is maybe like a sub tip, but it's to ask the question, what is wrong with your world? And that will help develop like what issue you want to tell within your story. What is wrong in the world and how will your character fix it? For example, usually in fantasy stories, the magic system is usually both the problem and the solution. So just think about like what is wrong with your world and yeah, how your character can fix it through their story. I feel like it's a really great way to further develop not only your story, but your character within that story, because both go in tandem. The next tip is that history is very, very important. know your lore of your story, because your lore will literally enforce and inform the future state of your world and what it's in. I especially find such help when I'm developing fantasy novels in characters and very important people from the past making decisions that have, of course, usually terrible consequences for the future world or the current world in which your story has taken place in. You gotta make sure that your world evolves and has changed somehow within its history, because I feel like a static world is very unrealistic. You know, you need something to change. Maybe there was a rebellion, maybe there was a huge war, maybe there was the plague. There needs to be something like that that has changed the world in its history, which now the characters are kind of trying to deal with. And of course, those things can be actually caused by people. For example, maybe someone, a very important someone, cast a huge spell on the kingdom. Maybe a very important person murdered someone important. You know, like there's so many parts, like trust me, within my stories that where I have like no clue of what happened, like use what happened in the past to reinforce what happens in the future and the problems with the kingdom, the problems with your characters, you know, family, whatever it may be. Seriously, like past decisions and also past events that have happened will really help you enforce and create the plot for your story. And it's also really good because usually your readers don't really know the whole context. So things are kept in the dark, which allows your reader to ask those questions, such as like, I want to know more about this book. What happened here? Why was this caused? You know, all these different questions, which is a good sign. Okay, the last tip I have for you guys is kind of like a jumble of things, but the main thing is to make sure you have a particular feeling for your story. I can't imagine, I can't even express like how important this is, because I've been hanging on to this so much with me writing my fantasy novels. It's so important to capture what you feel when you think of your story and your world, because that will help tether a lot of your plot, a lot of your characters, and a lot of just your writing and what happens in the story to that particular feeling. Like it needs to be otherworldly. This feeling needs to be something that your readers read and feel like they're a part of a whole new world. When I started to write Project BB, I literally for some reason just never made a Pinterest page. I never made a playlist, and literally those things are so important. Like I am looking for a particular feeling with my story, and only just recently have I discovered it and have I like realized its importance of not only like allowing me to be tethered to some sort of anchor when I'm writing my story and when I'm off with the fairies trying to figure out what happens, you can just return to this, but it also helps me just remember and help me keep going within my story and want people to feel the same exact thing. The last thing I just want to say is stay true to your story and stay true to like what you wanted your book to look like. I feel like sometimes we kind of make these decisions for the plot, make these decisions for the market to make our book more marketable, more tropey, more fitted to a particular structure like Save the Cat, when your story isn't told that way. I think especially in fantasy, there's just so much to explore and so much specific, you know, feeling and so many like different things and beings and yeah, just like history that happens within your story. Explore it if you're really excited about it. Don't let anything, you know, tell you, even yourself, don't let yourself tell you that you should cut this, or you should tone down the magic system, or you should make this be told in a very particular way when it's not the way that you want to tell it. And also just have faith that your story will show itself. I think with fantasy, it's always difficult to kind of know everything all at once when the plot is so entwined with your world and its system, as well as the characters, because they of course reinforce what happens in the plot, but also like the state of the world as well. It's like all these things are working in tandem, the characters, the world, and the plot. So at the end of the video, I hope you're not too stressed with like trying to brainstorm everything. Just know that you, as you write your story, the world will come to you, the story will come to you, and you'll be able to explore more about your story. I need to quote Leigh Bardugo again, but in a TED talk, oh my gosh, literally so inspirational. She said, and I have it like literally written down right over there, and it says, art happens in revision. So just make sure that you keep that in mind and know that your story will be told perfectly in the way that you imagined it eventually. And you don't have to get it all down at the page in one moment or one draft. You know what I mean? So stay true to your story, and I know that you'll be able to get there. Anyways, thank you so much for watching today's video all the way to the end. If you guys want more tips or want to build your skill in world building or anything else, make sure you check out Skillshare. Links down in the description below. Also, maybe scan this QR code to sign up today, and the first 500 people to click the link or scan this QR code will get 1 month free trial on Skillshare. So thank you so much, Skillshare, for sponsoring today's video. Without further ado, I'll let you guys get back to that brainstorming and that plotting and that writing of your amazing, amazing fantasy book. And with that said, see you guys later. Love you all. Bye.